My name is Era, and I'm the host of the Tamil Creator Podcast. I chat with creators from all over the world to share their stories and discuss hot topics in a way that I hope inspires, educates, and entertains you. I've been working really hard to deliver amazing guests and great content to you. But before we get into this week's episode, I just need your help with two things. Number one, hit that subscribe or follow button on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on so that you're one of the first to get notified when new episodes drop in the future. Number two, go to thetamilcreator.com to take a 2-minute quiz that will tell you what kind of creator you are. I would love to hear what results you get. Your support means more than you'll ever know. Thank you. Well, hello everyone. Today I have the most interesting man, or I call him the modern Renaissance man, Mr. Nelson Sivalingam. This guy's done so much. We just talked about it before, but we've been aware of each other. I've probably met him a few times in person. He's actually probably hung out with my brother and my sister more than me, but very interesting guy. I'm really excited to kind of share his story. Just kind of some, snippets before we kind of get into it. He founded a company called 1 Minute London, which I think of as kind of the Snapchat for business before there was a Snapchat. He had a Kothu stand. He created an award-winning film called The Rajini Effect and some others. And now he's doing like this multi-million-dollar company called HowNow, which is super interesting. And I'll let him kind of explain that later. But I won't steal any more of his thunder. I'll let the man himself speak and kind of introduce himself. So Nelson, tell the people a bit about kind of your upbringing and kind of, some of the things we talked about. So let's start off by doing that.
I was just going to say, Ara, I'm just that Ara fanboy, right? I was just speaking to your sister and brother to get to you, mate. We're finally here on record. Thanks for having me on the show. And I guess upbringing, pretty much born and bred in a town called Barking, and I mention that because it's typically the first thing people find out about me. I speak a lot about the town I'm from, not because it's not really famous for anything, but it's a large part of who I am. And so born and brought up there, went to a state school, classic kind of first generation Sri Lankan parents who moved there, and 2 other brothers. I don't know what else you want to know about my upbringing, mate. I'm trying to think of what's interesting.
and I should have brought this up, before Nelson started speaking before he kind of ruined the surprise. But, I've had a lot of Canadian guests and some American guests, but I think, he's one of a couple of like guests from the UK. So in addition to being interesting as a person, he also has an interesting accent to a lot of probably the audience that's from Canada or like the US. So just something else.
That's true. I should probably set the context before anyone thinks Barking is an exotic island. So it's not. It's a part of East London.
Yes. So he's from East London. And I didn't summarize. I gave you like all the things he did, but I would say he's a Renaissance man that's an entrepreneur. And he just has I would say he's kind of like Leonardo da Vinci.
Wow.
The Tamil modern version. So that's what I would call him. So
you've just set me up to 4 now, mate. You've just set me up to 4.
Now do you have any siblings?
I do, yeah, 2, 1 older and 1 younger. So classic middle child syndrome,
So that's why you're like a very good kind of not negotiator, but like you're good at kind of navigating conflict. Is that the kind of person you are? Like you
know what, funny enough, I would say so. I think out of the 2 brothers, I'm probably the one who tries to resolve things. And I'd say that's true.
Awesome. Well, I mean, why don't we kind of get into the interesting stuff? Obviously, your town where you kind of grew up is interesting, but the other stuff, like, let's get into 1 Minute London. When I first heard about this, it was interesting because it was kind of like Yellow Pages but like more of an interactive like format in the sense that people got to see the businesses in like a 1-minute video. But like now the Snapchat came out, I was like, wow, like Nelson was ahead of the game. Like this is kind of like what I could see like a business feature of Snapchat eventually doing. But you did this, I think 5 years ago or 6 years ago, which is
it's probably more than that. I think it was probably 8-9 years ago, and I think it came at a time where this was pre-London tech startup scene really being a thing, and before we had like the Silicon Roundabout and all of those things. And it didn't come from a place where I wanted to start a tech startup. It really, taking it further back, my kind of primary passion is films And at the time we were making a film, and we had a production company where we were making commercials, corporate videos, music videos, all of that kind of stuff. And essentially we wanted a vehicle that would help us make money so we can make films. And so the initial reason for starting 1 Minute London was actually to have a business that would generate money to fund movies. And got into that, and essentially the concept was similar to what you said, but before, at that time, you had like restaurant booking sites like OpenTable and Book a Table over here in Europe, and it was more of a visual way of seeing restaurants, bars, and hotels, regardless of where you saw it on the web. We had come up with this interactive skin that sits on top and essentially allowed you to turn a video into almost a mini website that will give you a lot more information, and you can make a booking directly through that video. It was, there was nothing like it in the space. We were able to cover a lot of ground, work with some big partners, and we made a lot of mistakes. It was the first time we were building something like that. But in essence, at that time, I remember thinking there was a lot of similarities between making a film and building a business, right? In a lot of ways, it was tapping into the same part of the brain. You've got a vision, and you're trying to execute that vision. You can't do every part of the business, so you need to find people who are experts in that space. And the same thing goes for film. And so you get your DOP, you get your sound engineer. It's similar to that. You get your different people in a startup space, and then you try to go realize that vision. So that's where that came from.
That's awesome. And whatever happened, like, what was the end result of like 1 Minute London? Like, would you have some kind of exit or like some kind of way of, creating value for yourself from that project?
Yeah, so we ended up licensing the tech out to a publishing firm, and it wasn't huge, but it was worth the time that we'd put in, and it was enough for us to know, actually, this is a viable thing to be able to start a tech startup business. And we hadn't really, most of that was bootstrapped until the kind of final year. And so thinking back, we thought, actually, we got a bit more funding. We learned from the mistakes we made. We can put all of this experience and expertise into something else, and we could probably grow it bigger and do it with something that we were a bit more passionate about. As fun as 1 Minute London was, my passion wasn't necessarily driving traffic to restaurants and bars. It just happened to be a business that we ended up growing because we were so deep into it. And so I think at that time, after that, it bought us a bit of time to figure out, okay, what do we want to do and why do we want to do this? And now let's invest our time into it.
So you said the reason you started this business was to fund your film aspirations. And speaking of films, the Rajini Effect, I think obviously you started in London, and I think we did a showing or a show here in Toronto, which, did really well as well. Tell us kind of, why you created that film. Obviously, who doesn't love Rajinikanth, but like, tell us why you created like the Rajini Effect, and like what came out of it, like after kind of all the showings, you producing it, what did you get out of that whole experience?
Yeah, so what happened was we had made a couple of short films that were funded by the British Film Institute and Film London over here. A short film called Still Life, and there's another one called Article 30. And we had gone around and done different film festivals globally. And, if you ever take your film to a film festival, you know how super exciting it is to have an audience come there, the kind of setup, to see you're projected on the film and the interactions. So we were really kind of excited the next one for us was going to be a feature film. But making a feature film and fundraising for a feature film is so hard. And so we had a completely different script that we wanted to make, that we had spent, good year and a half writing. It's the first feature we wanted to do, tried getting money for it. We couldn't. And in that process, we just hit a point where we were just super impatient. And we were like, you know what, just sod it. Let's make a film, right? Like, let's just make a super low budget film, put in whatever money we've got. And this is, I make my films with my brother, Kavera. And we were just like, let's do something. And we were trying to toy around with different ideas that would make for a good low budget film. And then we thought about this idea of, we love Rajinikanth. We grew up on his movies. Like, we're hardcore Rajini fans. And obviously Rajini was super popular in Japan, I think. And at that time, what was about to happen was, I think Rajini's film Enderun was about to come out, and it was like a few months away. And there was so much hype and talk. It's the biggest movie, biggest budget Indian movie, all of this stuff. And at that time, we were talking a lot about Rajini in this film. And then we just came up with this idea of a mock documentary cross fiction of this Japanese guy who wants to become the next big Tamil superstar, right? And we laughed at the idea, which is always a good start. And we thought, actually, because we're doing it as a mock doc, we could probably do it in low budget. And that was kind of a few years into the Canon 5D, 7D revolution of kind of good aesthetics on a real low budget. And that's really drove it. And, again, that was probably like a bootstrap startup. We made a ton of mistakes, could have probably saved a lot of money by planning ahead, but we were just excited to start shooting. And a lot of it was kind of improv. Right, we had a great bunch of actors who most of them were offering their time for free, and it just evolved. And it literally took us we only shot on weekends. I edited in the evenings. It took us about a year and a half probably to do. But yeah, it's good fun. We look back now and it's good fun.
So what happened? Like, you made the film, it's like you have it. Do you have any plans to kind of re-release it or like do something else with it in the future, or?
Yeah, it's classic. I've spoken to other people who are in any form of art, like musicians and writers, etc. Sometimes there's just a joy in getting out your system, right? You almost, and I think often first-time artists, and if you're early in that career, they're really bad at thinking about distribution and getting it seen. Like I know we were like that. We just wanted to get it made, just for us to watch. And to be honest, we didn't really think about showing it to anyone or getting it distributed until we finished making it, or while we were cutting it, we were a bit more aware of what we might do with this. And so, yeah, we really thought about it late, and then we thought, okay, festivals. And so our short films had been to a few festivals, and so we had good relationships there, and they were always keen to see what we'd make as a feature. But to put this into context, our first two short films were like real dark. Like, one was about youth knife crime, and the other one was about like child soldiers. So this was kind of completely offbeat for what we had made. But they were curious to see what a comedy from us would look like. And so we sent it to festivals, and we premiered in Stuttgart, and we won Best Film, voted by the audience. And I think that was it. Once we got that, I mean, we were surprised, but the feedback was really good. People enjoyed it. And after you've been cutting for so long, you stop laughing at the jokes in the film. Right now, this film is turned into a real serious film as far as we're concerned. So it's to sit in a cinema and hear people laugh for the first time at the film that you're watching. Like, yeah, it's a great feeling. And after that, it just went around the world, all the way countries I've never been to. It got screened in Hawaii, for example. And
crazy! That's how did it get to Hawaii?
Just from sending it out to festivals, they picked it. And once you get to one festival, they hear about it from different programmers. And obviously you guys, screened it for us. It was shown in India, and the feedback from there was great. And it just did a festival circuit. And then we did a few shows around here in London. And that was it, really. We kind of, it was the joy of seeing other people watch the film.
No, that's awesome. It's so funny about the Rajinikanth or the Rajini Effect, because you made it about a mockumentary about a Japanese character, but in Japan, actually, I didn't realize this, but there's actually a huge fascination with Tamil cinema, Tamil songs, and Tamil language.
Yeah.
So there's actually some truth to that. Like, I could see a Japanese person wanting to be Rajinikanth. Number two was, you're asking, like, you're a huge fan, I'm a huge fan. Surprisingly, like, my wife, she's heard of him, but like it's almost like an afterthought. And I was so insulted because, some of his best films, she's like, oh, like I was trying to get her to watch it, and she had no interest in watching it. So I was kind of insulted. But anyways, that's kind of
I mean, look, that's the point for me with my partner. I mean, she had never watched any kind of Rajini films, and I took her to the first one, which may have even been Enderun. But for someone who's not grown up on Rajini,
yeah,
I think it's sometimes hard for them to understand the phenomenon, right? Like if if you only showed them the last three films Rajini made, I think they'd struggle to understand why we were so passionate about this guy. And they, they only see it for, oh, it's this 70-year-old man, he's doing etc. etc. But yeah, I don't think they fully understand it if they've not seen some of his greatest hits.
I can't imagine. I can't like remember, but like I just remember, just like you go to like Western like movies and like you replicate or like you say some of the things from the movie. I can't tell you how many people like you went to school after like Basha or like Padiyappa and everyone was doing the finger waving or like the scarf thing. So it was just kind of like such a big cultural impact at that time, and
Sure.
yeah, it's crazy.
You know what? I tell you one really amazing experience we had was this charity run by a friend in the UK called Building Blocks. They put on a screening of Barsha like not long ago, actually, a few years back, and it was a packed cinema hall. Um, everyone knows Barsha. And what was incredible was people are anticipating, they know what's going to happen,
Yes, yes.
and just the energy in the room. And we had taken two people who had never seen the film before. And they were just, if you've never gone to the cinema and watched a Rajini film, the first time you experience it, you're baffled, right? Like, especially if all you've ever watched is, say, Hollywood films in cinemas, then you go and you see how crazy people get about seeing Rajini on screen. It's an experience in itself.
No, I remember because my dad helped screen in Canada, I think it was Padayappa. And I can't tell you, that was like my first Tamil like movie experience, like in the theater with other Tamil people instead of watching it at home. It was crazy because like teenagers, because I don't think I was younger, but like teenagers were like, they knew what was coming and like they got out their seats. People were like running down the aisle, like in anticipation of what was coming. And it was so crazy because I've never seen that like in a normal theater before. So it was so cool. So why don't we kind of, move from.
We could just make this episode about Rajini.
I should try to get Rajinikanth on the podcast. Going from like now film to food. So, I found like all the stuff you're doing interesting. Also because I'm similar to you in the fact that I have a lot of different interests, and like there's times where like it's kind of ebbs and flows where like I'll be obsessed about something for like 2-3 months and I have to do that or explore that. But I have like a central theme. But so that's why I was kind of really interested when you kind of got into food and you did the Kothu stand. So tell us about that, how that started, why you did it, and yeah, like do you have plans to go back into food?
Yeah, so food's a big passion. Not that I cook that well, but in terms of eating and trying food, I think it's one of the handful of joys in life is that. And so I really look forward to trying stuff out. And Sri Lankan food is obviously a big part. I eat at home, and my mom's an amazing cook. And I always thought like Kothu roti was an untapped, especially at that time. I know it's quite different for you guys over there because the kind of Tamil presence over there is a lot more, I think, bigger and felt compared to what it was back here in London, especially in like the city and central areas. And so to get Kothu roti, you would basically go to the suburbs of London, right? You'd go like anyone listening from London, like they know, like your East Hams and your Wembleys and you're further out. But in the city centre, we didn't have anywhere, right? You didn't have any Sri Lankan. This was pre, I think it was Hoppers. That was like the first Sri Lankan restaurant. But this is pre that. You didn't get it in the city. And I would often go around saying, this would make such a great city lunch joint. And I never intended to start it or go into that line of business. I would just, anyone who would listen, I'd say it to them. I was like, trust me, if you started a restaurant, just focus on Kothu roti in the city, lunchtime rush in the office, you'd make good money. And I even tried reaching out to some of the guys in the suburb, the restaurants, and they were just, I can't fault them. They were running the business as, what you would call a lifestyle business. And it was to earn a living to sustain their family and the people who are working there. It wasn't necessarily about franchising it and growing it for a lot of the guys who I spoke to. And I was like, I can't start this on my own because I can't cook. And so I need a partner there. At that time, I came across, my business partner at the time, Dharani. And Dharani was exactly that. She was passionate about Kothu roti and cooking and Sri Lankan food. She was the chef. She needed the business part of it. And so it was a really good fit. and we were like, let's do this, right? And it was really, the idea for starting any business is I would like to see this thing exist, right? And if I could support you in making it exist, I would do that. But if I can't support and I have to get involved and I have to build it, then I'll do that. I just want to see this thing.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And so it started off as, food markets, and it's a graft. I mean, to be honest, Darnie did it more often, but I wanted to be at the stalls to be able to understand what's, how difficult it is, what are the challenges, how we can optimize the process. But what I enjoyed about it compared to having been in a digital space was this is a tangible product and you get instant feedback. And I love that. You can see people queuing up. They eat it right there in front of you because it's just a box of kothu with a mutton roll and a drink, a can of nectar. And they'll tell you straight away, this is amazing. It's the best food you had. And then we got a more permanent fixture in two parts of the town. And then I sold my shares on it when it was getting to a point where, this is when I learned the hard lesson of focus, right? If you want to grow one thing beyond a certain size, it requires more of your bandwidth, and that requires focus. And you've got to make some hard choices on what you want to focus. And that's what I did.
So where is how's that Kothu stand or the Kothu business doing now?
It's still going. My interest was, if I was still part of it, I wanted to franchise it and scale it up, right? I wanted every city to have one of these quickie kothu joints. But Darnie wanted to really just build out a restaurant that she could run in that way. And so that's what it is now. So that it's still there in South London.
I feel like you're right about kothu roti kind of being one of the most first transposable kind of foods from the Tamil industry, Tamil market to outside the Tamil market, because me and my wife, we had brought it to some church friends, some kothu roti. It was obviously not as spicy as we eat it. And they ate it and they're like, this is amazing. And the way they described it was, this is like spicy stuffing. And I was like, oh yeah, that's how I'd probably market it, spicy stuffing.
Yeah.
But it was crazy because I thought, we brought a whole container and I thought they'd be too spicy or they just wouldn't like the flavor. But they crushed it. I think within 20 minutes, 30 minutes, this whole container of what 20 or 30 people should eat, 6 or 8 people just demolished it. So I think, so you're right, something's there. I feel like somebody will probably do this in terms of a franchising model, maybe. And then to your point about focusing on there's Tamil restaurants that sell different kinds of food, but I think a kothu only store, it's like Halal Guys in New York City. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
They basically sell Middle Eastern food, but it's very simple. It's rice. You either pick chicken or beef, and hot sauce or no hot sauce.
Yeah.
So simple. They have these stands. It's killed it. It's a multi-million-dollar. So I feel like I can picture the same thing with kothu roti, either food trucks or these stands, because they're easy to kind of set up. The franchising fee would be low. We're just kind of brainstorming here, but I feel like it's a very plausible idea. And the next step would even be there's people that are Tamil, or maybe not even Tamil, that want to eat Tamil food, that live in, pockets where there's not that many Tamil people. How do I get them kothu roti that they could even take out of a box within 20 minutes, package it all together and eat it without driving an hour or two into the city? So,
yeah.
Man,
it's still definitely the opportunity, right? When you think about how you can get a quickie pad thai, right? And places that are focused around pad thai, and this is really no different. And I think it's a wholesome meal to have a mutton roll, box of kothu roti, and so I think there's definitely still an opportunity, because we've now actually seen an increase in the number of sit-down restaurants, right? What I was interested in is really focusing on that one product that you could scale. You can standardize the taste of it wherever you are going in. And you get a pizza joint, right? It's really no different to that. But yeah, maybe someone who's listening to this will do it.
I would do it almost like I see when people do ice cream flavors, have kothu roti, your standard kothu roti, chicken, mutton, whatever.
Yeah.
But then have some crazy ones. I feel in food, crazy or concepts sell. So some kind of outlandish concept that people would come for, and then hopefully buy other stuff. Man, maybe I want to. Maybe I feel like I would. There's like even beyond the food, the actual food, or like selling it like to ship off or whatever. I feel like you could do merchandising or like just like a whole brand around Kothu.
Like imagine like the Kothu blades,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah, yeah,
I can tell you, guys who used to come into our store,
yeah,
right? They came in because of the theater, right?
yeah,
They could hear it. They'll come. They'll see this thing happening, and we
yeah,
had some really good guys who can really put a show on about it. And I
yeah,
was just, this is everything you want, right?
yeah,
It's quick. It's got the theater. Box it up. The flavor hits you straight away. And like you said, it has got variety, right? You can do all your kind of posh meats like your venisons and boar meat, and you can try all of that stuff and really kind of, you know, fusions of different countries, and it's got so much scope, right, to do it. And I think what also helped was I remember the year we opened our restaurant. Lonely Planet had said Sri Lanka was the top one holiday destination.
yeah,
And so what you had was people who that year were more aware of Sri Lanka.
yeah,
Right? Because I know years of growing up where people had no idea where Sri Lanka was, what Sri Lanka was, etc. And so now there's so much awareness. People would come to us going, oh my God, I've had this dish on holiday. And that really helped, right? Because now they're a lot more familiar with the dish.
And you kind of, the reason I'm kind of, as you're talking, I got passionate about it was, I don't know if I told you, but like growing up, my dad used to have a restaurant, a Sri Lankan restaurant, and he was one of those guys that had a restaurant to make a living. And I never thought about it. I never had the business acumen or thought process back then. But just thinking back, like I actually made kothu roti. So like picture like I was like 14, 15 in the kitchen because my dad would teach me because like, you know, it would get so busy sometimes he wouldn't be able to do it. So I'd be like, kind of like, I would kind of know all the order of things. I don't know if my kothu roti was anywhere as good as his, but I made it and customers ate it and they didn't complain.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just kind of brought back memories. And like back then it was kind of like this thing on the fringe, like you said, in Toronto, if people were like, where's Sri Lanka, what's Tamil? Now it's like I feel like people know, like I say Tamil, they're like, oh yeah, they have Tamil friends or they try Tamil food, or there's somebody they know that's Tamil. I feel like Tamils just infiltrate everywhere. So yeah, it's a good way of kind of talking about how food influences culture. But now let's get to the main event. Even though all of this is like really exciting, tell us about HowNow. Tell us about kind of, you know, how the idea started. I feel like I was trying to find it online before, but I feel like it pivoted from another idea that you had, right?
Yeah, it was. So we started out as Wonderush, and that's still what the kind of registered company is called.
Yeah.
The general idea was, look, we were at work for a very long time, right, of our life. You graduate and that's it. You're in a career, you're in a job. And it almost felt like you were kind of this steep learning curve from school to college to university. And then you kind of like just stagnate a bit, right? And it was learning, but also how many opportunities do you get to step out of your comfort zone, really push yourself and challenge yourself. And so we were really trying to solve that problem, right? And you know, we essentially, I always summarize this period of time. I say we took the scenic route, right? We essentially tried a bunch of different ways of solving this problem, and trying to see, okay, what works. And you know, some of these, this is where we really learned a lot, because sometimes it's easy to think just because something's generating revenue, it's working, right? But it's only working if it's following the trajectory of where you want to go. Right? Like if you're trying to build a 10x business and you're stuck at X or 2x, and you can't see the indication that it's going to grow to that 10x in that period of time, then it's not working in the way that we want. So we had a clear idea of what kind of business, where we wanted to take this. And so, yeah, we tried a bunch of different things, still trying to solve this idea of how do we push people out of their comfort zone, lifelong learning, how do you drive that? And in essence, we landed where, you know, if you look at work, a lot about work has changed. But the way we train people at work really hasn't, right? Like, as you look at the last 20 years, we train people the same way, which makes no sense given how much everything else has changed. And so we thought, okay, what would workplace learning look like if you build it from scratch? And taking everything we had learned from all these different things we tried out, and we essentially come up with a new framework based around our platform for how you can drive workplace learning and how people can drive lifelong learning at work. And we kind of landed on that, refined our positioning and everything and changed our name to HowNow and positioned it for the B2B market. And, there's term product market fit, you feel it and we did. And so, within a very short period of time, we grew super fast. We signed, some of the fastest growing companies in the world. We signed some of the largest corporates in the world. And that was it. So once we hit that, we knew, okay, this is space. And it was something we were passionate about, right? The mission behind it is essentially, if people had the right skills and knowledge, we could solve the biggest problems in the world, right? That's what it fundamentally comes down to. The question is, how do you make sure people have the right knowledge and skills to solve the biggest problems in the world? And that's what we're solving through our platform.
I feel like this is like a side note, but I feel like you are very good at coming up with memorable product names. So just thinking of like 1 Minute London, Kothu, HowNow. But I feel like what you described is like you kind of almost built something before like this black swan event, which is COVID, happened, which I feel like probably accelerated your business because you built something which is perfect for now, this culture of kind of remote work where people are not going to be able to be centralized in an office where training happens or onboarding happens. And I feel like a platform like yours, how you're describing, is, like luck kind of happened to kind of, you've already built something amazing, but now luck and kind of these new circumstances kind of helping, I'm guessing, accelerate kind of your the adoption.
I call it survivor guilt. Because exactly that. But it wasn't. It's I guess there's an element of luck because in a time where businesses are struggling, but also it's a bet we made on how we think the world would go.
Yep.
Right. And what COVID did was just expedited our transition in that direction. So we would have felt this in maybe 3-4 years time, but we felt it sooner because that's the bet we made.
Yep.
And so, there are a lot of people, I'm sure, pre-COVID who would have questioned the way we were doing it, what we were doing, but it just happened that way. And we grew by, over 400% in the space of 12 months, which meant we had to double the team size. A lot of things changed whilst we were in the middle of a pandemic, but it's definitely kind of helped us. And it's not just the fact that overnight 100% of workplace training that was happening in a classroom just disappeared, and so you needed an alternative, but also if you listen to business leaders today, the biggest thing on their agenda is, do our people have the skills to do their job?
Yep.
Right? And you need something that can tell you, A, what skills do you have? B, what skills do you need to have? And C, how do we bridge that gap of getting from what you have to where you need to get to? And I think we're now solving that problem that's just entered the C-suite, right? It's reached the table. And I think that's really helped.
You talked about a lot of your other business ventures kind of being bootstrapped, and imagine this was bootstrapped at the beginning as well. But it gets to a point where, especially like the way you described it, you have certain kind of ambitions for growth or where you see the company. The inflection point is, okay, do I continue bootstrapping and call it a lifestyle company? Which I don't like that term. I feel like there's nothing wrong with a lifestyle company. And the other point is, you raise money to kind of accelerate something that you found that works, that has that product market fit. The environment, all the factors are like all there. You just got to take advantage of it. So how did you decide? Because I know you raised money, and from some notable people like, Andy Murray and a few others. How did you decide when to first raise money? And like, how did you kind of go through like courting the right investors, and have you kind of raised subsequent rounds, things like that? Yeah.
So in terms of fundraising, and I agree with you, when I say lifestyle business, I don't say it in a way where you some people look at it like a derogatory term, but it is what it is, right? It's a business that funds your lifestyle. Yeah. And I say it exactly like that. It is what it is. And I think that is great. And I look at people who do, and I think I question whether if I was to start another business, whether I just do something that actually just funds my lifestyle, and I'd be absolutely happy with it. And I think that's really important to point out before we talk about fundraising is fundraising is a choice, right? And I think somehow, how we talk about in the broader picture, people think you got to get married, get a house, get a car, have kids, and all that. It's the same as that, right? It's the same as if you're arguing against that social norm and conditioning, you should also be questioning fundraising as a norm of what the kind of startup narrative and what we read a lot about. And it's a choice because it changes the way your business operates. It changes the way you'll grow your business. It's a different beast. And to make that decision, you need to be clear. And I wasn't, right? I want to put that into context. It's a lesson I've learned is you've got to be clear on what you want. What do you want out of this business, right? All right, you want to make money. I get that. We all do when we start that business. But how much money do you want to make? And that might seem like a strange thing to think about so early on. But actually, every decision you make from the moment you start your business is fundamentally answering that question. Because you could build £1 billion business, and if you only own 5% when you sold it, you would make the same amount as if you built a £100 million business and you own 50% of it, right? So if the outcome for the founder is the same, why are you doing it, right? You're doing it because maybe you wanted to build £1 billion business that had such a global footprint and impact, in which case that's fine. If you know that is your why and that's your reason for doing it. So at the time where we raised, that wasn't the thinking behind it. The thinking was I had done a bootstrap business and I'd gone on that adventure and I'd experienced that. And quite often the thing that drives me is just to experience something. I wanted to experience what running a restaurant would be like, right? And so the same thing drove me here, where I wanted to know what a venture-backed funded startup, what that ride would feel like, right? And what would be different? What could we achieve with that money that we couldn't achieve before? And so we quite early raised money for this, probably 4 months into starting and having any version of like an MVP product that we were able to raise on it. Now, in terms of looking at investors, first thing to point out is, quite often, I don't know if it's the same over there, but over here, people talk about kind of friends, family, and fools round. I don't know any friends, family, or fools who've got the money to invest in a startup. So often when I hear this, I was like, that's privilege right there, my friend. Because, no one's giving me money to start it. And so we didn't know anyone. We didn't know anyone who'd started a startup and raised funding. And we didn't know anyone who was a high net worth who could have put that money in. So a lot of it was cold. A couple of things I'd say is, based on your space that you operate in, what I typically recommend is look at similar startups in that space, look up on AngelList, you'll see who else is invested, or look up on LinkedIn or LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I approach it almost like a sales process. So line up my leads of who I'm going to contact, and based on their space, they've got an interest in it. Then you use an email scraper. I'd recommend Email Hunter, Prospect.io, any of these tools. Scrape the details and send them a note, and you'll be surprised. A lot of people do respond. If you're kind of straight to the point, cut the waffle and you go straight in. And also, if you do have any mutual connections, try to get the intro. If you can't get the intro, sometimes I've been cheeky enough to say, "Oh, so and so mentioned you while we were having a chat," and they're probably not going to check. You got to do what you got to do. And that gets you kind of your first intro in. So I would say, especially now, it's probably a lot more accessible. You could probably tweet a potential investor and they'll probably tweet you back, right? If you're doing something. So I think that has become a lot more accessible. And sometimes people overcomplicate thinking that's the hurdle. It's like, I don't know anyone, I'm reaching out. But actually, it's the part of putting together your story, right? If someone's investing in a business that's only 4 months old, right? We've got very little traction to show them. It's all about the story. And that's why I think sales is such an underrated skill for anyone other than a salesperson. Like, people almost look at it, I don't like sales. I don't like going into a sales role. I was speaking to a friend of mine recently where she was saying how frustrated she is at work when they talk about networking and building your personal brand. And I was like, why is that frustrating? Right? Do you want someone to hire, let's say, any old salesperson, or do you want them to look for, I want Nelson in my team? Right? That's the difference between your personal brand and being able to sell. And I think a large part of that early fundraising is that. and it's the story.
Yeah, no, I think you when you talked about sales, before I got into sales, because I think as a founder, you're always kind of selling with whether
Yeah.
you realize it or not. And it's interesting, kind of, you talked about the story. I feel like your film passion, your passion of film helped you with telling stories because you're able to craft the story people want to hear. And I feel like with sales that, but two misconceptions about sales that I see that I had before I got into it and realized I didn't have to be either of those things was I always thought it was like this super outgoing person that has to be loud and like, I thought that's how you sell. But I realized I don't think I'm that loud or extrovert. I'm probably like in between, but I felt like I could sell, and that's one. Number two is like I feel like sales is more of a science with a bit of kind of, what's the other one, science or art. So it's kind of an art as well, but it's really a science because I learned that, you talked about that trick of like, hey, this person mentioned you. I have a sales story where I got a client that had like, in our healthcare startup company where I talked to a person at another company. They happened to mention they used to work at this company. And so when I reached out to this company after like a year, they didn't respond to any of my emails. In the subject line, I wrote, this person referred me. And then I said, would like to chat. And they responded within like an hour. And I got that meeting. I closed the client after a year. But it's so crazy, like all these like, you have to take a systematic approach to sales, and there's a bit of art. The art is like testing subject lines, testing length of email, all these small things, but it's definitely a process. So I feel like the misconception around sales is only a certain kind of person can do it, and I disagree with that.
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I would describe myself as an introvert, right? Like I'm not, I'm not that expert who's outgoing, networking, and all of that. And so for me, it is something I need to turn on, right? Like I turn on that switch when I need to. For me, it is work, and a big part of it, it's sales is almost empathy in action, right? Because I'm reading the room. I'm reading what you're saying, and sometimes everything you said about that kind of example. If you were on the receiving end, it would make sense, right? Like if someone reached out to me saying they knew a good friend of mine, I'm more likely to respond. Yeah, but people lose that empathy sometimes when they first get into sales, where they almost look at the prospect, whether the prospective client or a prospective investor, as this kind of abstract piece, right? Like as I don't know what they're thinking, but rather than being really empathetic about, okay, what would someone in this role want? Like what's going to get me my attention? And what can you do around that? And for raising money is sales, right? Like that FOMO, to make investors feel FOMO, it's purely sales. It's at that early stage I'm talking about, right? Like Series B beyond is a different ball game. You've now got metrics and data to look at, but in the early stage there isn't data, right? There's very little data, so it's based on you and your ability to tell that story and get people to buy into that story,
I
right?
think it's yeah. I think it's also listening as well. I feel like big part of sales is listening. Somebody has a problem, they're telling you.
Yeah.
I feel like if you're a bad salesperson, you just have what's on your mind versus what are they actually telling you, and then reframing it in a way that they understand based on that problem versus how you want to tell it. And I
Yeah.
feel like, funny enough, poker also helped me with sales in the sense that poker really, if you break it down, is you place bets to get information. So it's like, do I fold? Do I stay? Do I raise? You're putting something out there, you say something, and then you see how people respond. So like you probably have done this with your product, maybe not. Like I've done it where I told clients that, hey, or potential clients, we're working on this product. It's in development. We haven't developed it yet. But I tell them this is how it's going to work. If they're not excited by it, I'm like, hey guys, this is not a priority. But if they're like, hey, that's awesome, like we could use that right now, and I hear 5 people saying that, then it starts getting developed. But I already make the sale before that. So I feel
For
like
sure.
it's
Like we did that exactly with this product, like a step further, which was
yeah,
we built a design prototype, right?
yes,
So
yes, yeah. I started doing that as
that
well. Yeah.
way they can click around, they can feel it, they can,
Yes.
they're actually experiencing the product, and that is enough to be able to close a deal sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. We started iterating to that as well. The design, like there's a ton of good products that kind of just with the design, it feels like an app or like
Yeah,
whatever, like
yeah,
that's pretty awesome. Um, as I feel like, you've been growing this company, I feel like there'll be some kind of successful outcome. We won't jinx it, but I think there will be for you. So I feel like a lot of the people that I know that are friends that have got to that point, they've exited or like some kind of successful outcome. If you're in the startup world, the next logical place to kind of go is angel investing or some kind of investing. Is that is that something you've thought about, or like is that something of interest to you? I'm just curious, like from your point. I know you're not there yet, but yeah, just
Yeah, I get this a lot from actually my friends as well. Again, what would you do next? What would you do next? And I like to be honest, I don't know. I can't see past where we are right now and where the next few years are. But when I do have a moment to kind of think this through, like it's I shouldn't really compare it, but one of my friends is saying when you've just given birth, if someone asks you whether you want to have another kid, you'd probably say no, right? But maybe once that's kind of settled down and a year later, maybe you might change your mind. And I think similarly, when you're in amidst running a startup, you might think, nah, I don't want to start another one again. But I'm pretty sure, given what we've done up until now, if we saw a problem that excited us, we could start another thing again. And definitely, I love the idea of angel investing because it's especially for someone who doesn't focus on one thing. It's great, right? Because you can be involved in solving so many different problems with multiple different ideas. You don't have to do the day-to-day execution. You could just talk about kind of the top level vision. Why don't you think about this and do that? And so I can definitely see that being super exciting and a way of living through other startup founders and doing that. But I know one thing's for sure. I mean, once we start, we'll definitely go back to movie making again, right? Like I think this has just been the longest detour to get back to making films. But it means I think for what we've done, we'll probably end up being better filmmakers. At the very least, we'll run a better production with everything we've done. But yeah, that's probably what I'll do.
The way you described angel investing is exactly why it interests me, because it's kind of like a good way that I've heard somebody say this is it's an outlet for you to monetize curiosity. So like,
I like that.
you have a lot of different interests. Like everything described, I get to like delve into and learn about different industries without doing any of the day to day. Just give advice and high level strategy, and I could make money from it. Where do I sign up? But obviously, it's a lot more than that. But like from a high level, that's how I would look at it. Like maybe I make money from it, maybe I don't. But I feel like it's similar to like Bitcoin and like Ethereum. I put money into it like a while ago, not because I thought it was an investment, but more so I was hoping to make money, but it was like if I have money in it, I'm incentivized to check the news or like read about it or like what are other people doing about it? How do they feel about it? If I have no skin in the game, I have no reason to kind of learn about it. So that's kind of another reason for me to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
We've heard all about kind of like your work centric kind of activities, but what does Nelson like to do outside of work? What do you do for fun?
Hang out with friends. I think it's my favorite thing is probably to just hang out, have deep chats, and over a drink. I like that. I like to head out to places I've not been, so that's a big one for me. Eating out, watch a lot of films. Probably used to watch a lot more before, but I still watch a ton of movies. I read a ton, so that's probably read and write and quite a bit. That's probably what I do, but. Yeah, that's about it.
What's an insecurity of yours?
This is turning into therapy. Yeah, I'd say it's whether I'm learning fast enough, right? I have a constant kind of awareness and consciousness around, when you do finally figure something out, the first question I ask myself is, what could I have done to figure that out quicker? And why did it take me so long? And when you constantly do that, you start to preempt, am I actually figuring this out quick enough? And that's my insecurity in every sense of it, like in work, in business, as an individual outside of work. Like, am I learning things quick enough about, how to manage a relationship, how to grow as an individual, and to get good habits and get rid of bad habits? Am I learning fast enough? And that's probably my kind of, I would say my biggest insecurity.
Now we'll get into something even deeper. Personal legacy. How would you want to be described by your friends and family in a few sentences?
Yeah, this is a big one. Like, strangely, I think I used to think about legacy a lot more than I do nowadays. And I think I've always thought every kind of interaction you have with someone is an opportunity to leave a legacy, right? Because I could only meet you once. And if I was to die after that, that one time interaction is going to be my legacy for you. And so, given that's what it is, it's that every interaction. I'm not one for small talk, and my friends will tell you this. One of my friends, actually, after they called me, they said I was born awkward because of the questions I ask. So I bought the domain name. I was like, I like this, so I'll buy it one day. I might use it. But the idea is, even in a situation where I'm networking, I'm terrible at small talk or what you would perceive as talk that's not adding value to you and it's not adding value to me. I have very little patience for that. So even if I've just met you, I would go real deep in terms of, because as far as I'm concerned, this might be the only conversation we have and I've got nothing to lose. And so that's how I'd like to be remembered, because that deep conversation drives me to either add value or create an experience. And I'd like people to remember that. In some ways, I think to simplify it, it's I've added value, right? When people remember the legacy in some shape or form, I've added value. And in retrospective, I think the business enables me to add more value using this vehicle. And in some ways, I think that's why I do it, is as an individual, I could add value to, say, I don't know, X number of people. The business helps me add value to 10x number of people. And as long as people think that's what I've done, I think it's a pretty good legacy.
Great way of thinking. I feel like with respect to what you kind of said about small talk, I feel the same way. I feel like I go to a party. I'm not one of those people that are kind of in the middle, drinking and like just having superficial talk. I'm the guy in the corner with somebody, asking them about their life and like why they're doing things they're doing, and giving them solutions or ideas that I have, because I care. Like when I meet people, like I like to get deep, like you said, very quick, but not because it's like a nosy thing. It's like I just like very fascinated by what drives people. Like why is somebody the way they are, and then
Yeah.
like what can I learn from them? What can I share with them? And for me, going to a party, there's 100 people there. If I have one connection with one person that's deep, that's all I care about. I don't care about
Yeah.
having.
And I agree, Aaron. I think for me as well,
Yeah,
it is a learning opportunity, but not in the turn like, what can I learn today kind of way.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
it's in a, sometimes what I do is say there's something, we were talking about this just before we hit record, was about having children and deciding whether you want to have kids or not. But if at every point in life, you have different decisions you're trying to make. So any interaction I have, if that's the theme that's running through my mind and you happen to mention something that's related to that, I'll use it as an opportunity to essentially bounce different ideas, right? I might play devil's advocate to see, what do you say? Well, tell me the other side of this argument, because right now I believe A, but I want to make sure I could argue the opposite side as well as this. And so you use that opportunity, right? And if you looked at it that way, you get so many different perspectives on so many different things. Why waste it on talking about things that actually I don't care,
Yeah.
right? And the truth is, you probably don't care as well. And so we're just fooling ourselves by doing a little dance around each other versus let's just talk about the stuff that matters.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like it'd be easier said than done. I feel like a lot of people don't want to get that deep for whatever reason. Maybe they have some kind of insecurity. Maybe they just don't share.
Yeah.
But I feel like most of the world, even though we are the exact same with that, most people would find that, like you said, awkward. You see, you got called born awkward. I think Shiv makes fun of me sometimes. She calls me awkward era for that reason. So I get it, man. I get it. Now going on to kind of learning, I know you read a ton, like you're always kind of trying to improve yourself. What's like a book or podcast you've kind of, read in the last couple, or read or listened to in the last couple of years that has made an impact on you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. In a couple of years, there's a lot of like business books and a lot of like work L&D learning skills kind of books, but maybe broader than a few years ago. Like a book I've recommended the most. I don't know whether I'd do the same now, but I think it was a very important book for me. I think it was the book that kind of drove me to start our first business. That kind of tipping point was a book by Orshaw. For anyone who's watched the documentary, they're like, that guy? Yeah, but that guy, I don't know if you've not read his stuff. There's a book called Courage, The Joy of Living Dangerously, a very small book. But it did wonders for me. Like, and it's probably the book that I recommended the most during that period of time for many, many years after. It just did a lot around, we make so many decisions on the back of fear. And fear of failure, fear of, what are people going to say, people might say. And I think it was a really good book to kind of structure that thinking around it. Then I'm trying to think, then, it's probably cliched for a startup founder to say Steve Jobs is biography, but I think I liked it because it humanized a figure that, there aren't many people, and I don't know whether you have this, right? We might go off on a tangent here, but when someone you've never met, right, essentially has passed away and you feel sad about that. And I don't mean sad in the sense that, when 10,000 people have died because of an earthquake, you're sad because of the loss to humanity, right? This is one person, right, who's died somewhere. And I distinctly remember the day Steve Jobs died. And I could probably say that for a handful of other artists or people that I follow and I admire their work for, where I genuinely felt a sense of loss. And the sense of loss around, just look at the crazy amount of impact, like on my life, not just in decisions I made, aspirations, technology, all kinds of things. So I think humanizing that figure, and I read it afterwards, was really good for me. A bit of fiction that did wonders for me was Shantaram. If you've not read it, it's a really big old book, but there's an interesting story behind it, which was like, I think I was like 19, 20 or something. I was traveling in Mumbai, and I was at this cafe called Leopold Cafe, and there was this guy who looked like a bit of a wrestler with a long ponytail, and he was like giving away autographs. And I went out to him and I was like, "Mate, what are you famous for?" And he goes, "I wrote this book called Shantaram," and they were selling it in the cafe, in Leopold Cafe. And I was like, "If I buy a copy, would you sign it for me?" And he goes, "Yeah, all right." So I bought the book, had no idea whether it's popular or not. He signed it with a message. I didn't actually read it for another 5 years. It just sat on my shelf. Then I read it. Like, phenomenal book. I could still quote some of the lessons that I learned from it. Like, there's an incredible passage about how do you define what is right, what is wrong. And I learned a lot from it. It's really about a convict who escaped and turns into a gangster in Mumbai. But actually, there's so many great life lessons from it. So that's one that comes to my mind. There are a few that kind of stand out to me when I think back.
That's interesting. You talked about Steve Jobs as this person you didn't know that you were sad about the day they died. For me, the last person I can remember that happened was, strangely enough, it was really weird, but I was going through like a Anthony Bourdain kind of marathon for like 1 year, and like I really kind of, like, I read his story, kind of his struggle of kind of how he experienced success later in life. Like, he was a dishwasher or something for like a long time. He wanted to write, and eventually kind of got the show. So I was like, oh, like I can empathize with that. And then just kind of just following him around, similar to like a podcast, but like on a show, you feel like you get to kind of learn the person. Obviously, we didn't know his entire person because humans, but I was like, oh man, like this guy's amazing. He travels to all the different parts of the world. He seems really interested in the cultures and kind of empathizing with them, and he does it through the vehicle of food. So I don't know, I just like I was on this like 1 year kind of thing where I just be watching Anthony Bourdain episodes, and then one day I saw that he like died, and like it really, I don't know why, because like I don't really feel celebrity deaths, but like for him, I felt sad that day, probably similar to like how you felt sad about Steve Jobs. So it was just kind of
it didn't feel like it's not you don't really look at it as celebrity death, right? Like this is how many people have the opportunity to have impact on people they never come across.
Yes, exactly.
And this is a daily impact. Like there's so much impact there. And I think whenever something like that happens, and I always talk about it with my partner going, I don't know why. Like I know why I'm sad, but it always surprises me how much of an impact it does have. And then it reminds me, man, that's what I want to do. Like, you want to be able to have that kind of impact where at least the legacy is felt beyond just a handful of people who you meet on a daily basis.
I think, for me, I always ask a legacy question. For me, the way I operate day to day stems from what I want my legacy to be. Not, I would love my legacy to be like that, but also for me, it's like, how do I want people to remember me? It's like the people that like, it's like a great husband, great dad, like all those kind of adjectives. And like for me, it's like whatever I do, if it's entrepreneurship, or if I create a movie or I start a restaurant, all those things come at the end. I feel like I'll meet friends and family, people that could become family through doing all those things, like you with How Now. You spend so much time there. I'm sure some of those people have
Sure.
become friends, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like I want all those other adjectives first, and that's how I
Yeah.
want to live my life. And then eventually at the end, yeah, maybe he was a good entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of how.
And I agree. Like I would hate it if all someone remembered about me was that he was that CEO or founder of this business.
Yeah.
I really hope that's not what happens. And often when if I ever think about what if I die young, and I'm thinking this is all I've done, that's the only thing that crosses my mind is I just don't. This is not the defining part of my life,
Yeah.
right? And nor is any single thing that I've done. It's not a restaurant. It's not a film, right? It's a life, and I think you want to live it in that way. And I think for me, it is, yeah, going far beyond, like you said, there's those many hats, many roles, and it's whether you can leave a legacy in each one of those.
It's like that Maya Angelou quote. I always mess up quotes, but I think the premise is like, it's not what you say, do, etc. It's a kind of how you make people feel.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like, yeah. So there's some people that have this gift. I'd say my wife has that, where like you can make people feel like you care, like without you saying you care. It's like I want to leave people with the feeling like, hey, I actually really cared about you, without telling you that I cared about you. Maybe it's kind of like how my parents, they don't really communicate love or like all that like verbally, but like, they'll buy me food, or like they know exactly what I want, or like they'll call me to check up on me. Those are kind of ways of kind of making me feel good. So I
yeah.
feel like that's kind of what I want to do. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, like, because you're in the UK, and like, I visited there. I'm sure people from Toronto that visited there, but you're not there on a day-to-day basis. Tell us about kind of the UK Tamil community, what it's like, and how it's impacted you on a personal and professional like level.
Yeah, so I would say, in terms of when we were making our film, and then actually for a short period of time we also had this online channel before online channels were really kicking up, called Indie Brown. We were doing a lot of Tamil behind the scenes interviews and stuff, and I think it was during that period of time where it's probably I interacted the most with different Tamil artists and people who are doing all kinds of different things, and that's probably when I got to hear about what you guys are doing across the pond. And I would say it's probably changed now, but I know growing up, it didn't feel like the community was as organized or as mature as what it is in Toronto, right? And like I said, I think there's a much, much stronger presence. And I could see that from, I've got cousins, nephews, and nieces out there, and just seeing what that was like, how many shops you guys had, and cinemas just for Tamil films. And that was like, wow, you guys have a cinema that just plays Tamil films. That's amazing. So it wasn't like that. And I don't think we're still necessarily there. But I think definitely in the last 5 years or so, there's a lot more kind of bringing together the community in different ways, right? Like, I co-founded the Entrepreneurs, Tamil Entrepreneurs with Rob and Kobe. But there are, different ones, like there's the Tamil Association of Professionals, which was, one of the guys started, who's obviously Canadian, Karen. And, there are guys who are bringing together the community in different ways. And then there's multiple people in the space who are organizing, bringing young Tamils together based on different things, like whether it's art, music. And I think that has been great. And what I'm now starting to see is, when I was running 1 Minute London, one of my frustrations was I'd look at a good friend of mine was a Jewish founder. And I highlight the Jewish part because one of the things he told me was, when you start something, there are so many Jewish investors who are willing to come together and support your initial. So his kind of first couple of millions he raised was all from the Jewish community, right? And when we started that, he started as a mentor, and he would ask me, do you have anyone like this in your community? I was like, no. Like, I can't believe people do this for you. And it used to really frustrate me, because there have been successful people who've made their money in the Tamil community. And, they don't have to. This is not a claim, well, you should be giving your money. They don't have to do anything with their money. But it was like, you could support it. There are tax incentives for this. So why don't you start supporting younger entrepreneurs, and let's build this community of entrepreneurs. Now it is happening, right? Like, especially in our last round of funding, we've got a couple of Tamil angel investors who, like, when I raised 5 years ago, we had one Tamil angel put in money, and it was the first time they'd put money into a startup. Like, they didn't get it. When I said, you're not going to get dividends, right? Like, you got to wait till we sell this. And it was like, what? So that took a lot of convincing, but now it's not. There's a lot more of an understanding around it. And I think that's just great evidence that so many Tamils are in the startup. Well, not enough. More Tamils are coming into the startup scene. There are Tamils who have made money from investing in startups and got the payout, and therefore they've got a taste for it now. So I think it's growing. I think it's probably more exciting times ahead in terms of what the Tamil community in the UK is doing.
That's awesome. What's, sorry, before I go into the last question, I feel like that's like super interesting to kind of see, because I feel like the last part about angel investors understanding that it's an illiquid asset for at least 7 years, maybe if you're lucky.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm seeing more and more, like I'm exploring kind of maybe doing very, 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 very like micro angel investments. But the reason I'm doing it is what you described, or why I would want to do it, is to kind of basically just show, hey, I believe in you, even though, it'd be cool to make money from this, but what I'm giving you is basically a tangible way of showing that I believe in you. And I hope, the next round of people, you're getting like big time VCs, or like other people that are like more brand names.
Yeah.
And I can just say I was there at the beginning. So I've done that with a couple of people. So we'll kind of see where that goes. But what's a piece of advice that you would give to aspiring or your fellow Tamil creators?
Man, this is it's a big one. Wow. What I guess one that I go back to, and is probably more relevant for Tamils, and especially if you're second generation Tamil, and now you've got third generation, etc. But it's the idea that there are incredible success stories of first generation Tamils who've come here and done incredible. Like, even going back to what you mentioned earlier, some people look down on this lifestyle business and whatever, but that is incredible. Like, having gone through just starting a couple of restaurants and going through that period, just to think they didn't even have the starting point of which I had, and they still managed to start a restaurant, hire people, create employment in a country that was foreign to them. And so we've got a better hand than they did, right? And question is, are you going to play that hand? And most people, I think, when someone else starts raising the chips and the stakes get higher, they're like, no, I got to keep what I've got, right? I got to be cushy in what I've got, and I don't think they make the most of the opportunity they have in front of them. And I think in some ways that's a disservice to people talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, but you're essentially everyone who's worked to progress this far. I think there is a sense of responsibility to move the needle, right? To this is it's a relay, pass it on, right? Don't just stand there and say, no, I've got a great view, I'm going to stay here and enjoy this. It shouldn't work like that. And I think so most of us, and I'm not generalizing here, but I'd say most of us are probably in a better off position than our parents or our parents' parents were. Question is, what are you doing with that, right? And whenever people are thinking about, should I take that risk? That could be anything. Making a film, starting a business, making music and pursuing that as a career, whatever it is. If it's the perception of risk that's holding you back, then really weigh up what is risk about this, right? Where is it going to take you? You're not going back to zero, right? Because zero is much, 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 much further down the line. And you're probably going back to 3, 1, maybe. And I think it's just realize that and really ask yourself, are you making the most of the opportunity you have? Because you only have to get it right once, right? You could screw up 10 times, people will only talk about that last time where I got it right. And that's what I'd say. I think that's what, whenever I'm questioning myself, why do this? Let me just settle. This is too hard. Why don't I just get a job? The grass is always green on the other side. I was like, life would be so much better if I just got a job and I work my way up. Every time I think about that, I think, no, this is it. Like my bad is not too bad.
You heard that, people. Step up your game. So that's a good segue into, that's a great kind of discussion on the serious side. Now to kind of, end things off on a more funnier note or fun note. There's a game that I call Creator Confessions. I'm going to ask you a bunch of quick questions, and you answer like with the first thing that kind of comes to mind. Okay?
I just want to know, is my mum going to be able to listen to this?
This should be easy one. Favorite Tamil food?
Favorite Tamil, Kothu.
Something that scares you?
Death.
Favorite show you're watching?
Favorite show I'm watching now? I'm not liking anything I'm watching at the moment now, but the last one I enjoyed was Money Heist.
A place you're itching to travel to after the pandemic is over?
Singapore.
Fellow Tamil creator you want to give a shout out to?
Man, so many. Look, in no particular order. The other Ara in the UK scene, I think he's done a lot for the scene. My partners in crime, Kobe and Rob, I'll give them a shout
out. Favorite childhood memory?
I don't know. One that stands out to me now is probably queuing up for a couple of hours to get into watch Paddy Upper, and then getting into watch Paddy Upper, and then when he pulls down the swing, the entire thing went absolutely berserk. And I was thinking that's what a cinema experience should be like.
Pet peeve?
People who moan.
Person or celebrity you look up to?
I mean, we mentioned Steve Jobs, but I guess as a filmmaker, I'm a massive Money fan. Like,
his movies are awesome.
Money, I'll show you, Ara. I know your listeners can't, but that's where we are.
Crazy.
Right above my desk. But yeah, like, I love the guy's films. Love him.
His films are phenomenal. I have a box full of like just when he wrote them like DVDs or CDs I have to get through. Like I want to rewatch them again.
All right, yeah, I'm gonna throw a question at you, mate. What's your favorite Money film?
I mean, you can say Bombay, you can say, but my favorite that like sticks out, like just because of kind of a lot of different things is I'm not pronouncing it right, but Kannatha.
Yeah, Kannatha.
Oh, so good, such a beautiful movie. But honestly, like there's a ton of his movies that I could say were like amazing. I feel like every one of his movies were atypical. So that's another podcast. Age you want to retire. And I'll caveat that by saying, when I say retire, it's not the traditional definition. It's like, basically you do what you want when you want. Like, it's like, that's how I look at retirement. It's like ownership of time or freedom of time. So what age do you want to retire?
Yeah, look, this in itself is probably a longer conversation because I think there's a lot of freedom that comes when you live below your means, right? And I think that's essentially what financial freedom is. But if you keep moving the bar, then you're never going to be financially free. But I guess, in the more kind of traditional sense of it, probably by the time I hit 40, I don't know. By the time I hit 40, I want to change up what I'm doing, right? Like I don't want to do the same thing for too long. And I think by that time I would have done it for quite a while. So I would have switched it up.
Celebrity whose life you want to experience for one day.
Wow. Money. Let's just stick with money. I want to see the world through his eyes.
And finally, a PSA you want to leave our audience with.
Wow. Don't waste time.
Love it. Guys, I hope you guys got as much out of it as I did. Nelson, it's been a great podcast episode so far. So far it's done, but great episode. I think people are going to learn a lot. They're going to find your life super interesting. If people want to connect with you after the fact, because you're such a amazing guy, an interesting guy, how do they do that? What's the best way to do that?
I'm really not that interesting, but if you do want to get in touch, on Twitter, it's that Nelson Dude. On LinkedIn, Facebook, it's just Nelson Sivalingam. Get in touch. My email address is nelson@gethownow.com. More than happy to help out if I can.
So anybody that's looking to make the Rajini Effect Part 2, you know who to You know how to get a
Well,
hold.
I've got an idea for part two, guys. And the main guy's name is Taiho. He goes to India. So the first one was about him winning a film competition. He wins it, goes to India. Now he's trying to meet Rajini and feature himself in a film. That's the line. Happy for you to take it and make it.
There you go, guys. Nelson, it was a pleasure. And before I kind of let you go, everyone listening, please give this podcast a 5 out of 5. It really helps increase our visibility, especially on Apple Podcasts, but on Spotify and Google too. And if you can comment, share, and like our stuff on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, that'd be great. And if you have any feedback or ideas on future guests or topics, reach out to me at hello@thetamilcreator.com. All right, Nelson, thank you so much. And for those of you listening, on to the next one.
Thanks, Aaron.